Continue with this theme now of legal rights and fights. Our final panel discussion is called Representation and Rights, Achieving Change from Within. And someone who walks that walk is Alex Greenwich, the member for Sydney. Could you please welcome Alex Greenwich and the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Browne.
Thanks, Alex.
Hi, Browne.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Sydney World Pride. Thank you all for joining us at this really important session on the importance of LGBTQI+ representation. We are joined here by a really esteemed panel of people from right around the world. We have the Honourable Harriet Shing, the Minister for Water, Regional Development, Equality from the Parliament of Victoria. Please welcome Harriet. Next to Harriet, we have State Senator Sarah McBride from the 1st District of Delaware. Please welcome Sarah.
Sarah.
We know the importance of local government to our community, and we have the Mayor of the City of Hobsons Bay, Tony Briffa. And joining us from the Cook Islands is the Honourable Tina Browne, who is the Leader of the Opposition in the Cook Islands. Please welcome Tina. So we're going to get right into the discussion about the importance of visibility. And because Tony is all frocked up today, we'll start with you first, Tony. So take us through what the importance of visibility and representation of the LGBTQI community means to you.
Yeah, it's really important that people see themselves in the government and in all levels of government, including councils and local government. For me, I admit, when I was first elected to local government, I had no idea about doing anything LGBTI related in the council, and it was only about a year into it that I realised, wow, as a queer person, I can actually do some awesome stuff in local government for our community. And yeah, that was just a light bulb moment, and ever since then we have done in Hobsons Bay so much for the whole LGBTIQA+ community, whether that means, you know, obviously marching in Pride March, and I do that in the robes, but, you know, genuine programs, so, you know, in our childcare centres, in our kindergartens, just not assuming heteronormativity, assuming and supporting everybody irrespective of their sexual orientation, gender identities, their intersex status or whatever, and we do that across the board. So even when it comes to Seniors Month, we make sure we have LGBTI events in Seniors Month, in Children's Week. We integrate our community in the rest of the community in everything that we do.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you for being such a trailblazer as well.
No, thank you.
And Sarah, what does the power of visibility mean to you?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be here. It's a long way from the great state of Delaware, but it's wonderful to be in Sydney. You know, the power of visibility and representation, I think, is twofold. One, there's the symbolic power, and two, there's the substantive power. As Tony was saying, it's difficult to be what you can't see. And when I was a young person, the idea that someone like me, an out transgender woman, that we could get elected to public office in the United States seemed so impossible that it was almost incomprehensible. And the fact that I now have this opportunity to serve a community that I was born and raised in, and to show young trans people in the United States who are facing a particularly discriminatory and dangerous backlash right now, that they can live their truth and dream big dreams all at the same time, is the professional privilege of my life. But beyond that symbolic role, what we know is that diversity in government is not a luxury, it's a necessity. One, it's a reflection of a healthy democracy, because if you don't have diversity in government, that means that all of your people don't have equal access to every aspect of civic engagement. That includes running and serving in public office. But two, you can't craft effective solutions for diverse communities if you don't have the full diversity of that community at the table. That's true in technology, it's true in business, and it's certainly true in public policy. And we know that while diversity in government and representation isn't an end goal, right? It's not a panacea. It doesn't ensure that you're going to have people who are effectively and productively and helpfully helping the community. It is a necessary foundation. And I'll just close on one thing, because to me it highlighted the importance. One of my colleagues in the state Senate introduced an anti-trans bill. And that bill was referred to the committee that I'm the chair of. And so, that senator came before my committee and had to answer my questions. He had to defend his discriminatory policy proposal. And for the first time in American history, an anti-trans bill was heard by a transgender legislator. And for years, trans people have had to go before anti-trans lawmakers in the big chair to plead for our rights, fight for our rights, and now a lawmaker introducing an anti-trans bill had to come before a trans person in the big chair and look me in the eye and answer my questions, and I don't think it'll come as a surprise he didn't get my vote, and I was able to kill the bill. But what I think was, and I'll close on this, what I think was so powerful in that moment was that at a time where trans people, particularly trans young people, are coming under such significant attack in the United States within state legislatures across the country, a trans young person who was watching that hearing was able to see not just an ally who was standing up or speaking out on their behalf. They saw someone just like them defending their rights, defending them. And that's not just comforting. I think it's empowering to know the possibilities and the power that we can have as trans people.
Thank you so much. So powerful. And Harriet, as an out LGBTQI plus politician in Victoria, the first one in the Victorian Legislative Assembly, Upper House, in Legislative Council, the Upper House of Victorian Parliament, what has your experience been?
I think it's as much as anything, as Sarah said, about visibility being twofold, and I think that it's also about humanising our experience as LGBTIQ plus people. And in the Victorian Parliament, as we've seen within many other parliaments in Australia, including the federal parliament, there's a persistent desire by conservative politicians and social movements to villainise and to weaponise gender and sexuality and our identity and our stories for other purposes. And one of the things that I have worked really hard to do is to front up time and time again and to make people explain to me, within close proximity to me as a human being, why it is that my rights and my identity as one version of our LGBTIQ plus communities is not deserving of equity and of equality and of dignity. And that's a really uncomfortable road to walk. We all walk it in some way, shape or form. It involves often coming out multiple times a day. It involves leaning into identifying that ingrained discrimination and the confirmation bias that if you talk about matters of equality, then that must be your one and only attribute of contribution as a public figure. And it's also then, I think, about staying the course. It's about stamina, and it's about resilience, and it's about finding our chosen family of people who get it, that it's our lived experience, and that therefore that leans into visibility. It doesn't just empower people who are already advocates and activists, it also provides a measure of comfort, as you've indicated, Sarah, that when we are talking about these issues, we're talking about them from a first-person perspective. And that is really powerful. That is as powerful as anything else in terms of what laws say, what regulations say. To see allies doing certain things is really powerful. To see our Premier march every year at Pride is really powerful. But to see law made by and with and for us has a whole other level of power to it that I think is enduring, and I think it is substantial in a way that allies, as wonderful as they are, need to provide the right space and hold that space for us to achieve.
Thank you, Harriet. And Tina, how is LGBTQI+ representation going in the Pacific Islands when it comes to elected office?
Let me firstly say that I am so privileged to be here tonight, this week. And secondly, when I was invited to participate, it never occurred to me that this was going to be the audience, about 1,500 people. So it's really awesome to be here and to be sharing and to be taught, educated. We are so far behind in the Pacific, other than New Zealand. Generally in the Pacific, we have the same challenges. We have my colleague from Fiji was sharing with us that for the first time in Fiji, they put forward an LGBT person. They were concerned, some of them were concerned, particularly the older members, because of the two things which is very common in the Pacific countries. We have religion and culture. And when I say religion, I say that it's a result of being colonized. And so the members of parliament are usually voted in by their constituents. And the constituents, about 80% of them are churchgoers. They are Christians or religion. So if the religion doesn't support LGBT, then you will not have a chance to be a successful member of parliament. And if you are a member of parliament, you have to be very careful whether or not you're going to support LGBT, because your constituents are likely to vote you out. So I was very pleased with the Fiji situation. At least they put forward someone. She didn't win, but it's a start. I know in my own country that I did venture out to ask an LGBT to stand in one of the constituents in my party, but for family reasons. And when I say family reasons, some of them were on the opposing side and on my side, so they figured they probably not the right time. So, but other than that, we're just starting. When I listen, and I've been sitting in meetings since Monday, and when I look at Australia and New Zealand and everywhere else in the world, you're miles ahead of us, miles. So we have a lot. Having said that, though, I am pleased to say it's not all gloom and doom. I'm pleased to say that in the last interview that our local news gave of the leaders, the three leaders of the parties in my country, we're all supporting our crimes bill, the new crimes bill that's going to be introduced, and it's just a question of when.
Thank you.
Yeah, well
Thank
said.
you. Progress is coming. And I might, my next question will sort of start where Tina's finished, which is on elections. You know, in New South Wales, we're in the middle of a state election at the moment. Hopefully in this audience are budding queer politicians who will run for office at a local, state or federal level. Yeah. I would love to ask the panel about their experience of running for elections and what elections are like for you. I'll start with you, Sarah.
Well, American elections never end, as people here probably know. So I announced for the state senate in July of 2019. The election was in November of 2020. So it was a year-and-a-half campaign. And, you know, I think when I announced, as I decided to run, I knew that my gender identity was going to be a particular focus, particularly in the media, because my election would have represented a first in the US. And so I knew that to win an election, you really have to demonstrate that you were going to be a legislator focused on all of the issues, right? And serving all of your constituents, including LGBTQ people, but everyone. And I knew as a trans candidate who represented a first, and as a person who had spent 10 years fighting for trans rights in the movement, that it was going to be easy to pigeonhole me. And so I was really focused on making sure that people understood, one, that I am a proud transgender person, and that is one part of who I am. Two, that the fight for equality isn't about some abstract moral principle. It's about making sure that everyone can get a good paying job, healthcare that meets their needs, housing that keeps them safe, and to be able to live in communities where they're treated with dignity. And that was a theme throughout my campaign. But it was also a challenge because the media wanted to just talk about my gender identity. My opponent certainly threw out anti-trans tropes my way. He said I wanted to teach sex acts to kindergartners during the course of the campaign. But what I will say is that the voters didn't respond positively to that. And I knocked on as many doors as possible before COVID hit, and then had to move to making phone calls, talked to thousands of voters during the course of the campaign. And many of them knew I was trans because it was all over the newspaper. And not almost to a voter, not nearly a single person brought up my gender identity. And in the few instances where it was brought up, a handful of instances where people would have genuinely earnest questions that I would try to answer and then sort of pivot to a broader conversation. But more frequently, in the handful of people that brought it up, they were excited about making history in our community. They were excited about more diversity in government. To me, I always say, if you want to fall in love with your community, run for office, win or lose, because you will genuinely meet good and decent people of various political stripes who welcome you into their homes, who open up to you, who are vulnerable, and who I saw judging me on my merits as a candidate.
Thank you very much. And Harriet, you flagged in your last answer the challenges of the last federal election, and particularly the way in which the trans and gender diverse community were targeted by some elements of the coalition. We also know the postal survey was particularly tough for the LGBTQI community. You've just had an election not too long ago in Victoria. What has been your experience with elections, and how do you support your community through them?
Sarah's been exceptionally optimistic, to my mind. It's a really wonderful thing around connection with community, and that is a really important starting point. But behaviour on the polls in the last federal election, in the November Victorian election, was vile. And it was vile in so many ways because there was a sense of emboldened permission for people to be hate-filled and transphobic and homophobic, to be discriminatory, to really take things to new lows. And we are lucky in Victoria in the work that we've done since 2014. We developed and rolled out Australia's first LGBTIQ+ strategy, the 10-year plan. It's great to see that the Commonwealth has just yesterday announced that it will do the same, a really wonderful thing to provide opportunities for place-based inclusion, for equitable access to healthcare, to a range of opportunities to have our stories told and our culture shared. But elections are about generalisations, and that's really hard when it's all too easy to generalise who we are and to generalise LGBTIQ+ communities. Last November, as I'm Australia's second Equality Minister and I'm Australia's first out Equality Minister, and I announced a range of policies that include additional work for LGBTIQ plus people in accessing health and health services, including mental health services, and a pilot for Pride in Ageing for older LGBTIQ plus people, as well as additional funding for events and for ways to include our communities all the way across the state. But it was also about saying we need to broaden the way in which we're considering what LGBTIQ plus identity looks like. And that's about the intersectionality of who we are. Because again, we are not an homogenous group. The Postal Survey tried to make us into one. We know from all over Australia. We are young, we are old, we are LGBTIQA+, we live with disabilities, we are neurodivergent, we live in our cities and in our country and rural and regional areas. We are from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And it's about those stories and humanising the experience of what it means, but also then moving into the space of saying, we need to normalise this. Because this is actually just about us wanting to contribute and to be afforded the same dignity and recognition and opportunity as everybody else. Also, by the way, I'm not just a lesbian. I mean, you know, that's really cool and I'm really glad about it. I mean, pride takes practice and it takes effort, and, well, it does for me, and I envy the people for whom it is really effortless. But it's also about saying, I'm a bit multidimensional here. I'm a policy wonk and I'm a massive nerd and I'm a dog lover and I can, you know, work my way through a committee process like nobody else, and for both of the people who watch it from home when it's happening, it's probably not a bad thing. But again, it's about saying, here are your elected representatives and we are diverse in the skills that we bring, and this is one source of that diversity. Which means I haven't answered your question at all, but I'm a politician and that's what I do for
No, you gave a great answer. You gave a perfect answer. Thank you. And also, a huge thank you to the Andrews government for the support they gave the LGBT community during the Postal Survey, the only government to fund mental health support specifically as a result of the Postal Survey. And Tony, you've been a leader for the intersex community for quite a while. You've also won 4 elections?
4 elections?
4 elections. Yeah. What has your experience been at elections as a member of the LGBTI community and as a leader of the intersex community?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's been interesting, and of course, I'm more than just intersex, so I'm a queer person, queer woman as well. And of course, last time I was mayor, I was, you know, Mr. Mayor, and this time I'm mayor, I'm Madam Mayor, and I'm, you know, happy to mix it up and be whatever the hell I am. You know, and I hope my mic's still working, and it's all good, you know. The community on the main, like 99%, absolutely fantastic, very supportive, and they just care if their local councillor, their local council, their local mayor is a good person providing what they want for their families in the local community. And that's why, you know, I've very convincingly won 4 elections, and as an independent. So I'm not pushing a party brand or anything. People are electing me. So yeah, look, but there has been challenges, you know, especially, I hate to say it, but other political opponents tend to use the LGBTI, you know, hatred, homophobia, transphobia stuff against you more than the community would. They try to rile the community up against you for those, you know, for their own gains, I guess. But the community, you know what? Every time I've been attacked by the community, and you know, it's very public, the community rally behind me, and they say, no, it is bullshit. That's very Australian, isn't it? And they support me, and I saw that time and time again over the years. I have to mention, look, I have had death threats as a councillor, and some that were taken very seriously by police. I mean, police pursued an intervention order against one person that was consistently harassing and threatening to kill me, so much so that the County Court of Victoria issued a 5-year intervention order against that person. So yes, there are things we have to be careful for yourself and your family, but you know, that's a very small portion of the community, in the main, very supportive. And just getting to the earlier question about I just wanted to mention about the laws that states and federal parliaments can make. Councils have got a way of influencing the outcomes of legislation and public perception. And I'm very pleased to say that Hobsons Bay was the second council in Australia to formally resolve to support marriage equality. And because we did that so early in 2012, and all the other programs that we were just including in all the other programs that we do as a council, and raising awareness, that when it came to that horrible plebiscite in 2017, that horrible, divisive, nasty, horrible campaign that we went through to work out, whether our marriages are legal or not, and can be recognised. When that vote came in, the western suburbs of Melbourne overwhelmingly supported marriage equality. And I am convinced that it is because of the work of the councils that happened. And if we look at what happened in Western Sydney, I guess, the outcome wasn't so positive. So councils can make a difference.
And Hobsons Bay sounds like a pretty cool place.
It's
we
awesome.
should all go visit.
Awesome, please do.
I might move to another topic now, Tina. You spoke in your first answer about the power of religion and the church in the Pacific. And we know here in Australia, a lot of religious organisations fund a lot of services as well. How can, from your point of view, how can members of Parliament influence support and funding across the different levels of government for the LGBTI community? Because we know there is so much power coming from the church.
I think the first thing I need to explain is that the members of Parliament themselves need to be educated because they are influenced by the church as well. And in summary, this is our setup in my country, anyway, in the Cook Islands. We've got 24 members of Parliament. And my summary of it is that a good member of Parliament is one who goes to church every Sunday, who does a lot of community work, who owns a weed whacker, who owns a lawnmower, who owns a rake. If you will not get anywhere if your credentials are a lawyer or professor or a doctor. That won't get you to be a member of Parliament. So that's your starting point. So that if you're then associated with the church, your voters are from the church, and therein comes the influence. So the church appears to be the body that I think the members of Parliament who are not dictated by the church can try and find a way around that. It's interesting you say that because generally in the Pacific and especially in the Cook Islands, LGBT is part of our community, always has been. And when they use that as a culture not to vote in Parliament, it cannot be, because we had a culture before the missionaries came, and that culture did not exclude LGBT. And so when we get to a point where the legislators are sitting around in Parliament, they are voting in accordance with the dictates of their constituency. But I am glad to say that I'm hoping that our Crimes Bill, our Crimes Act was enacted in 1969, and it was and the offending sections was derived from the Buggery Act of the United Kingdom. And of course, it's ironical because in 1969, when our act was passed, 2 years earlier in 1967, all of that was wiped out, repealed. So we continued to go down that path. In 2017, we started the process of getting a bill that will then decriminalise. And we've now going on to the 7th year. And I'm hoping that that sometime in the next 12 months, the crimes bill will be reintroduced in the House. And if we take the cue from the 3 leaders, we should be able to pass it.
It's very encouraging. And Sarah, we know that in the United States, the funding of LGBTI organisations can become a political tool for opponents of our community. How have you advocated for your community to make sure they are funded and well-resourced?
Sure. So, you know, in the United States, I think there's some slightly different dynamics in terms of government funding when it comes to LGBTQ organizations, depending on their purview. But we have in Delaware, for instance, some incredible direct service organizations that focus on the LGBTQ community. And for too long, they struggled, and this changed before I got there, they struggled because they didn't have any champions for them when what's called grant and aid was being passed, which helps to fund nonprofits. And so now we have a coalition that doesn't just include me in the General Assembly, who are fighting to make sure that they have not only funding in our budget, but also increased funding in our budget. But I think where our focus has been more on, frankly, because most of government funding happens through the executive and we're in the legislature, is to make sure that the policies are in place, that the funding that is going to organizations that aren't explicitly LGBTQ focused, that there are policies in place that require them to certainly, in a non-discriminatory fashion, serve LGBTQ people equally, and to more often have opportunities to prioritize LGBTQ people. And so in the United States, because of that divergence of where funding is typically coming from, we've really focused in the legislature on making sure that the policies are in place so that all of the organizations that receive any kind of government funds are truly focused on and prioritizing LGBTQ people.
That's fantastic. And Harriet, you are in government with a portfolio which has a responsibility, a very broad portfolio, but has a responsibility for the LGBTIQ community. In a pitch to the New South Wales Parliament and the Federal Parliament, what is the power of that portfolio, and how have you and your predecessor been able to make sure that our community has, a voice at the cabinet table when these decisions are being made?
Our communities cover every single portfolio of every single level of government that you can imagine. We are consumers, we are ratepayers, we are, if we can afford to buy a house, we are parents, we are students. These are the sorts of things that mean that when we need to talk about everything from employment opportunities through to education, through to healthcare, through to homelessness, there's a need to be able to infuse our particular priorities into that decision making. And that's where having a standalone equality minister and that portfolio is really important. The Commonwealth Government is doing a huge volume of work to understand and to recognise the different needs that we have, the comparative disadvantage and challenge that we face, but also the opportunities that we have to do better. But they don't have an equality minister. So when I've written to Commonwealth counterparts about a range of things, it's a very long CC list because I'm including everybody. And this is where I think that we need to make sure that across the board in other states, territories and the Commonwealth, we are talking about the needs that we have in a way that actively requires governments to consider us in decision making. And when we think about the work of equality as a standalone proposition, we have a Pride Centre, Australia's first Pride Centre in Melbourne. We've had an apology for historical convictions. We've banned conversion and suppression practices. We've amended the Equal Opportunity Act. We've got standalone support for LGBTIQ+ homelessness. We've got pilots for gender-affirming healthcare, and the list goes on and on and on. We've done that because equality has been a priority and a focus, and I think that there are opportunities for other jurisdictions to follow that lead. And again, there is so much opportunity for collaboration here. So should there be any governments who are listening, there are some really good opportunities to collaborate, and my door is always open, and my assistant will be screaming while she listens to this because as far as she's concerned, she controls the diary and not me. But it is about access. It's about visibility and access, and it's about the sharing of information, because not only are we also consumers and students and parents and teachers and old and young, metro and regional, we also don't just live in one municipality for our lives. We don't just live in Victoria or South Australia or New South Wales. We go internationally. We are visitors to other countries. The forms that we fill in matter. The way in which we access our official documentation matters. We've made changes in Victoria, including on births, deaths and marriages and birth certificate reforms. These are the sorts of things that we can do where there's a collective will to actually make equality something which is part and parcel of government's everyday work.
Thank you very much. I often subscribe to the theory that if you are not at the table, you're on the menu. So thank you for ensuring our community is always...
Some people might like that, Alexander.
No. Thank you for ensuring that our community is always at the table. Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And Tony, councils play such an important role in funding organisations. How do you do that at Hobsons Bay?
Yeah. It does, and we are the level of government closest to the people, and we interact with people in their day-to-day lives. So the way that we do that, we have all sorts of community funding for programs, and we ensure that they include LGBTI programs, services, groups, in whatever we do. We make sure that our libraries have all the right materials for LGBTI people. So so I'm very pleased about the way that we do it. I think importantly what Hobsons Bay also does, what we do in Hobsons Bay, is that we do take a leadership role for the whole western suburbs of Melbourne. So even when there are programs that we support in the LGBTI community in Hobsons Bay, we also invite our neighbours to participate. So if there are LGBTIQ people in, whether it's Brimbank or Wyndham or Melton or whatever, that they're happy to, we're very happy for them to participate, access our resources. When we have hopefully a queer ball later on this year, first one of the western suburbs of Melbourne, that it won't just be a Hobsons Bay one, but it'll be one for the whole western suburbs of Melbourne. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Tony. Now, we have 4 minutes left, and we want to break the myth that politicians can't stick to time. So let us, everyone has sort of 1 minute now to take us through what's ahead. What is, in 1 minute, what do you think is your policy, your funding, your representative a priority for your level of government where you are? We'll start with you, Tina.
Well, my priority is really quite simple. I'd like to see that crimes bill get through Parliament. For me, that is the first step. It's not the only step, but certainly that would be the first step to move us along in our LGBT community.
Thank you. Tony.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I'm very lucky. So being mayor at the moment means that I have a mayoral program, and in my mayoral program I have all sorts of LGBTI actions and programs. I'm about to announce expressions of interest for members for a community liaison group and looking for young people to work with me in a group to do some young programs, so programs for young LGBTI people in the community, including that queer ball that I mentioned, or whatever that event will be. So there's that. There's all sorts of things, but I'm also keen. So we established a LGBTIQ advisory group to the council about 10 years ago, and I always think that developing those sorts of advisory groups are great, but they need to be underpinned by a strategy and an action plan. We fulfilled everything on that action plan, And now I think it's time for us to do another strategic review of any gaps and develop an action plan so that we make sure that there aren't any gaps for our community in Hobsons Bay in the west of Melbourne, and continue doing the awesome work that we're doing.
Great. And Sarah, what's next for you? What's next for Delaware?
Well, one of the things that I love about serving in public office is that every issue is an LGBTQ issue from my perspective. And I'm really proud, one, that just this past year, my number one priority, the number one bill that I focused on passed, which is establishing paid family and medical leave in Delaware. You may know that the United States is the only industrialized nation in the world that doesn't provide at least paid maternity leave to people after welcoming a child into their family. So we were able to pass my bill establishing an insurance program providing paid family and medical leave to Delaware families, welcoming a child into their family, taking care of a loved one struggling through serious illness or health condition, or getting health care that they need through a serious health condition. And that includes, of course, same-sex parents welcoming a child into their family through all the different means that same-sex parents welcome a child into their family. It includes trans people who are having to take time off work to get transition-related care. And so this is a critical... This is a critical part of the social safety net that is far too absent in most places in the United States, and it really fully reinforces the fact that yes, LGBTQ people need policies that are explicitly about sexual orientation and gender identity, but they also need all of the policies that everyone else needs, and those policies need to be inclusive of our community and our needs.
And Harriet, apart from mentoring all the new state and federal equality ministers, what is next for you and what's next in Victoria?
Well, the first step I want to take is to blame everybody else for the fact that I only have 3 seconds left to talk. So
we'll give you an extension.
Liability sits to my right.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm a massive dork, right? And for me, statistics and data are so crucial in understanding where the gaps are in the system, where the opportunities lie, and in understanding what's gone wrong in the development of systems that are trying but have perhaps failed in all sorts of ways to recognise us and who we are. This comes down to the types of forms that we fill out. It comes down to census data and the Commonwealth's collection of information, which hasn't actually asked us about who we are. It comes down to the way in which we record LGBTIQ+ deaths and suicides. It comes down to the way in which law enforcement information is gathered so that we can identify where and how we need to do better. And that, to your point, Sarah, cuts across every level of government, every element of our everyday lives. And so data is really important. And again, visibility. Like, I don't want to say that it's not been wonderful being the first lesbian in the village, but seeing more of me, not me, but seeing more diversity in our parliaments is so important. And it's so gratifying to see a preparedness for people to be included and inclusive. And again, that intersectionality piece is something that I will never ever stop talking about, because it is so important as we refine the way in which we do policy, as we hold governments to account, and to make sure that in future years, people who stand in close proximity to others who are transphobic, homophobic, discriminatory, see different versions of who we are, with different stories and different experiences, and are then told to justify why it is that we shouldn't be included in all of our variations.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much to the audience for joining us today. Let's hope that more parliaments look like this panel. And that means you all need to consider putting your hand up to run for elected office.
Just not in Delaware.
Can you please give this amazing panel another big round of applause? Thank you.